If you think Warren Buffett made his fortune by saving pennies and by buying index funds like he tells college kids to do, you have been sold the biggest financial lie in modern history. What I'm about to expose is how this 94-year-old grandpa operates a $171 billion leverage empire that makes private equity firms look like they're children playing with monopoly money. While he's out there telling 19-year-olds like myself to live below our means, he's living off of other people's means to the tune of nearly $200 billion. By the end of this breakdown, you'll see exactly how Warren uses borrowed money better than any Wall Street fund, and most importantly, how you guys could actually steal his actual playbook, starting with zero capital and not the watered down advice that he feeds to the masses. I was 17, working as a swimming instructor at my local community center, making $18 an hour, teaching kids how to float. And after my shifts, I would head to the library and sit in one of those, quiet corner spots, scrolling through Warren Buffett's quotes on my phone. Like live below your means, save 20% of your income, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. I was buying into every word, calculating how long it would take me to save my way up to financial freedom. And one afternoon, this kid I was teaching, he was 8 years old, he asked me why the pool stays full, even though water keeps splashing out. I explained how the filtration system constantly cycles new water in while keeping the pool level constant. And that's when it hit me like a punch to the gut. Warren Buffett, his entire empire works exactly like the bloody pool system. That night, I went home and downloaded Berkshire's actual annual letter. Not the highlights, not the summaries, the full 80-page document. And what I found on page 47 made my hands literally shake. $171 billion dollars in insurance float. And this wasn't Warren's money. This belonged to millions of people who bought car insurance from Geico, life insurance from General Ray. But Warren, he gets to invest every single penny like it's in his own personal bank account. Picture this. You walk into your bank tomorrow and the manager says, "Hey, we'll give you $100,000 right now. You can invest it however you want. Keep all the profits, and we'll actually pay you to take our money." You would think it's a scam, right? You would smell there's something wrong, there's something fishy, right? That would feel your stomach drop. Wonder what the catch was. That would be exactly what you would be feeling. But that's exactly what Warren Buffett has been doing for 60 years. Except instead of $100,000, it's 171 billion. And instead of one bank account, it's millions of insurance customers who have no idea their premiums are funding Warren's stock market gambling. Since 1989, Warren's average cost of this borrowed money has been just 2.2%. And right now, you can't even get a mortgage for less than 6%. Treasury bills are paying over 5%, but Warren, he's getting 0.8% to borrow money. Let that sink into your bones. While you're celebrating a 4% savings account, Warren is literally being paid to borrow money that he then uses to buy Apple and Coca-Cola stock. But over the past 2 decades, Berkshire's insurance operations has generated over $32 billion in pure profit. That's 32 billion that they make from the insurance business itself, not even counting investment returns. Most insurance companies, they lose money on the actual insurance part, Warren, though, he turns that into a profit center while using the float as free investment capital. Here's the part that should make your blood boil. While Warren is operating with his 171 billion credit line from unsuspecting policyholders, you're being told to build a $10,000 emergency fund before you can even think about investing. You're being lectured about living below your means, while Warren, he's built his entire fortune living off of other people's means. The system is rigged, guys, but once you see the writing behind the wall, you can't unsee it. I know a 22-year-old who's figured this out and used it in house hacking. He bought a duplex, he's living in one side, renting the other, and to create his own version of float, his tenant's rent payment, that covers 70% of his mortgage. And he's building equity with mostly other people's money, the same principle that Warren uses, just at a human scale instead of $171 billion. And here's a story that Warren wants you to miss, guys. Buried on page 23 of Warren's letter is a story that reveals everything about how he really thinks about money. And it has nothing to do with the folksy wisdom that he sells to the public. In 2005, there was a guy named Pete Liegl. He wanted to sell his company, Forest River, to Berkshire, right? And when Warren, he asked about what salary Pete wanted as CEO, Pete did something that made Warren's eyes light up like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. Pete said, well, I looked at your proxy statement and I saw you make $100,000 a year. I wouldn't want to make more than my boss, so just pay me $100,000. Warren tells this story like Pete was just some humble, hardworking American who embodied old school values. But I can practically hear Warren's internal monologue. This guy just negotiated against himself and asked for 90% less than market rate. This is the easiest acquisition of my life. And here's the part that Warren glosses over because it reveals his true genius. And it's not a stock picking. Warren, he didn't just buy Forest River. He engineered what I call the Berkshire Blueprint. And that is a way to acquire cash flowing businesses using minimum capital while creating a psychological prison for the seller. Pete got his 100K salary, but here's the kicker. Warren structured a deal where Pete got 10% of any earnings above what the company was already delivering, not 10% of total profits, 10% of the improvement. Warren effectively said, I'll only pay you extra when you make more money than I'm already making. And over the next 19 years, Pete shot the lights out. Warren's exact words. But think about the psychology here. Pete became psychologically invested in making Warren rich. Every decision Pete made was measured against whether it would trigger his bonus, and Warren, he created a human profit maximizing machine that cost him almost nothing. This story isn't about Pete's humility. It's about Warren's ability to structure deals where he literally cannot lose. If Forest River maintained its existing profits, Warren got his returns on investment. If it grew, Pete did all the work and Warren collected 90% of the upside. If it declined, Warren could replace Pete and still owned a profitable business. Notice how Warren frames this in his letter. Pete exemplifies the American work ethic, but what really happened was Warren found someone willing to work primarily for Warren's benefit, while believing it was aligned with his own interest. Business schools teach this as principal agent alignment, but they sanitize it. Warren is the principal owner, and Pete is the agent operator. The genius isn't creating alignment, it's creating a structure where the agent works harder for the principal's benefit than their own. When I realized that, when I realized what Warren was actually doing here, I felt like Neo seeing the Matrix code for the first time. Those green numbers falling down the screen weren't random. They were the programming that runs reality. This is how you need to think about every opportunity, guys. Not how can I work harder, but how can I structure this so I can't lose? When you're looking at rental properties, you don't just calculate cash flow. You negotiate seller financing, rent to own options, or partnerships where your risk is minimized and your upside is maximized. I know someone who bought a small car detailing business using this exact approach. Zero down payment, seller financed everything, and he negotiated to pay the previous owner from monthly profits. And after 18 months, he owned the business free and clear. Warren Buffett, his psychologically applied to a $45,000 acquisition instead of a $450 million one. And last month, I was in my finance professor's office hours, Professor Martinez. Been teaching Buffett style investing for 15 years. He's got Warren's books lined up on his shelf, quotes him in every lecture. I asked him a very simple question. How much debt does Berkshire Hathaway have? He leaned back in his chair like this, got that confident professor look, and said, that's what makes Warren special. Berkshire is essentially debt free. Warren doesn't believe in leverage. I could smell his coffee breath as he spoke, see the certainty in his eyes. I pulled out my laptop right there and then in his office and opened Berkshire's balance sheet. The number made my screen look like I was glowing. $125.9 billion in total debt. I watched Professor Martinez's face drain of color. His mouth opened slightly like he was trying to speak, but no words came out. This is a guy who's been teaching hundreds of students that Warren Buffett is debt adverse. And he had no idea Warren is running one of the most leveraged operations in corporate America, guys. And everyone thinks Berkshire is this fortress of conservative investing. And that's that's just the biggest lie in finance. Look at these numbers that burned into my brain. There's 125.9 billion in traditional debt, 171 billion in insurance float, which is debt with better PR, and then there's $77 billion in deferred tax liabilities, which is basically interest-free government loan. And when you add it all up, Warren is operating with roughly 1.7x leverage. For perspective, most financial advisors, they tell individual investors never to use any leverage at all. Meanwhile, Warren, he built his entire empire on borrowed money. Here's the part that should make you physically ill. From 1989 to 2009, Berkshire had a AAA credit rating. You know what that means? Warren could borrow money cheaper than the United States government. In 2002, I've seen all the documents. Warren issued something called a negative coupon security. People literally paid him to lend them money. Picture the psychology. While you're lying awake at night worrying about your credit score so you can get approved for that $25,000 car loan at an 8% interest. Warren Buffett, he's getting paid billions to borrow money from institutions that are begging to lend to him. Now, this is where it gets criminal. And I mean literally. I found academic research from the Journal of Financial Economics, peer-reviewed, published by actual PhDs, that shows that 60% of Warren's legendary outperformance comes from leverage, not stock picking geniuses. And without the insurance float, without the cheap debt, without the deferred tax liabilities, Warren's returns would have been what the researchers called unspectacular, basically index fund performance. The oracle of Ohama's magic is actually just access to cheap capital that you and I will never have. But here's what makes me want to punch a wall. Nobody talks about this because it destroys the entire financial services industry's narrative. It's much more profitable for banks, financial advisors, and investment companies if you guys believe that Warren's success actually comes from patience and stock pitching wisdom that you can replicate with their products. The 77 billion is in deferred tax liabilities is essentially Warren's getting an interest-free, no expiration loan from the US government. And every time Berkshire's stock portfolio increases in value, those unrealized gains create more deferred tax liability, which becomes more investable capital. It's like having a credit card with no interest rate, no payment due date, and a limit that increases every time you spend money. Warren continues to invest money he technically owes in taxes while deferring payment indefinitely. The government has become his silent business partner, providing capital he uses to get richer while promising to pay them back someday. And this completely changed how I think about debt. Instead of avoiding it, like how I was taught, I started looking for good debt, borrowed money that puts cash in my pocket instead of taking it out. I found a duplex where I could live in one unit and rent the other. The tenant's rent that covers around 65% of my mortgage payment, property taxes, and insurance. And I'm building equity with mostly other people's money while getting housing at 65% discount. That's the same principle Warren uses with his 125 billion in strategic debt, just scaled to what a 19-year-old could actually access. And the key is, and this is what Warren does with Berkshire, is having multiple income streams to cover the debt service. And Warren, he has insurance premiums, uh, railroad revenues, utility payments. I have my part-time income, my rental income, and I'm building freelance income, which is diversified cash flow to support strategic leverage. 3 months ago, I was at this gas station, right, in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, literally just tumbleweeds and highway. I grabbed a Coke from the cooler and I noticed something that made my economics textbook feel like fairy tales. $2.50 for a 20-ounce Coke. And same that's the same price I pay in Manhattan. That's the same price in rural Alabama. Same price everywhere, right? I started talking to the store owner, Maria, who has been running the station for 12 years. I asked her why Coke costs the same everywhere. She laughed and said, because they can charge whatever they want. What are people gonna do? Not drink Coke? We tried stocking cheaper colas once, and customers would drive 20 miles to the next town rather than buy off-brand. The conversation shattered everything I thought about competitive markets. Warren didn't invest in businesses. He invests in monopolies with better marketing. Look at Warren's biggest holdings and feel the pattern burn into your brain. Apple, 47.8% right here, controls the iOS ecosystem, charges 30% on every app purchase, creates switching costs so high that people cannot even leave. American Express, 6.1%. Network effects mean every merchant has to accept it or lose affluent customers. Coca-Cola, 6%. Brand loyalty is so powerful that people will literally drive to different stores rather than buying substitute products. Geico, through insurance operations, direct sales model eliminates agent commissions. It creates cost advantages competitors mathematically cannot match. And also BNSF Railroad. You literally cannot ship freight across certain routes without paying Warren's toll. These aren't good businesses competing in fair markets. These are businesses that have rigged the game so thoroughly that they can raise prices without even losing customers. Warren doesn't invest. He extracts rent from captive customers. I spent weeks analyzing Morningstar's research on competitive advantages, and I found 5 ways businesses create unbreakable monopolies that Warren systematically targets. Number one is building. Number one is switching costs, right? So that's Apple's masterpiece. Try switching from iPhone to Android. You lose your apps, your photos, iMessage, FaceTime, everything. Apple has made leaving so painful that customers pay premium prices rather than the switch. Warren owns 5.9% of this psychological prison. Second is network effects. That's American Express's web. The more people that use Amex, the more valuable it becomes to merchants. The more merchants accept it, the more valuable to customers. It's a flywheel that gets stronger with every transaction. Warren doesn't just own stock, he owns part of the network. Third is intangible assets, which is Coca-Cola's mind control. Coke brand is worth more than all of the physical assets combined. All of their physical assets combined. People will pay 300% more for sugar water with the Coke logo than identical sugar water without it. Warren owns a piece of humanity's program behavior. Fourth, cost advantages, which is Geico's structural edge. While competitors pay insurance agents 15% commissions, Geico sells direct. This isn't a temporary advantage. It's a structural cost difference that compounds forever. Warren doesn't just own an insurance company, he owns a cost structure competitors cannot replicate. Fifth is efficient scale. BNSF's physical monopoly. Those railroad tracks took 150 years to build, and that cannot be replicated. If you want to ship goods across certain routes, you have exactly one choice. Pay Warren's railroad. He owns irreplaceable physical infrastructure. When I understood Warren's monopoly obsession, I completely restructured how I evaluate every opportunity. My friend Jake was trying to get me to invest in his food truck business. Great margins, hardworking guy, decent location near the university. But then I asked the Warren question. What stops 10 other food trucks from parking next to yours tomorrow and selling the same food for half the price? Jake's face went blank. The answer was nothing. No moat, no barriers, no switching costs, pure competition, which means shrinking profits forever. Instead, I found a small property management company in my area. The owner had exclusive contracts with three major apartment complexes, relationships that were built over 15 years that new competitors couldn't replicate, specialized software systems that would cost tenants thousands to replace, barriers to entry, switching costs, network effects, that's where I put my money. And it's generating 18% annual returns, while Jake's food truck is struggling to break even. Here's what should make your stomach turn. Warren talks about economic moats like it's sophisticated investment analysis. But what he's really doing is buying businesses that systematically extract wealth from people who work for their money. When Coca-Cola raises prices, you pay more for sugar water. When Apple charges 30% on app purchases, developers pass that cost to you through higher app prices. When BNSF raises shipping rates, you pay more for everything that travels by rail. Warren's competitive advantages are literally your higher cost of living. The system is designed to funnel money from people who trade time for dollars into the pockets of people who own those rent extraction machines. But here's the thing. Once you see the game, you can choose which side you want to be on. 2 months ago, I walked into a real estate investing meetup in this dingy community center conference room. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, folding chairs that squeaked every time someone moved, the smell of stale coffee hanging in the air. This guy, maybe 45, who's wearing a wrinkled button down, he gets up to present. I follow Warren Buffett's strategy. He announces proudly, buy quality companies and hold forever. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, show me your Berkshire skill portfolio. He clicks to his next side, 47,000 in index funds spread across Robinhood and Fidelity, plus a few individual stocks he bought after watching YouTube videos. I wanted to stand up and shake him. Warren Buffett doesn't buy $2,000 worth of Apple stock through a commission-free app. Warren Buffett calls Tim Cook's personal cell phone and negotiates a 174 billion position with board seats, special voting rights, and terms you and I will never see. We're not playing the same sport, not even the same game. Warren's strategies only work because of massive scale and access that individual investors will never ever achieve. Warren sits on 347 billion in cash and short-term investments. That's the larger than the GDP of most countries. And when he wants to buy a company, he can deploy 50 billion without financing, due diligence periods, or competing with other bidders. You're comparing mortgage rates on a $300,000 house while Warren is buying entire companies with pocket change. Pete Liegl specifically wanted to sell Forest River only to Berkshire, not because of the money, but because of Warren's reputation, and promise of permanence. And when you have a 60-year-old track record, the best deals come to you first. CEOs call Warren directly, and you find out about opportunities on Reddit 3 months after institutional investors have already moved. Warren's insurance business has government-enforced requirements, um, barriers to entry, and you can't just, start an insurance company tomorrow. There's capital requirements alone, that are in the hundreds of millions, plus years of regulatory approval. Warren's entire empire is built on owning businesses with legal monopolies that new competitors can't even access. And Warren constantly preaches about thinking in decades, but that's easy when you're already worth 120 billion. He can wait 30 years for compounding to work because he doesn't need money for rent, student loans, starting a family, or building a life. The whole patience narrative is privilege disguised as wisdom. And when Warren bought Coca-Cola in 1988, he was already worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And when he tells college students to think long term, they're working part-time jobs and living off ramen noodles. And if you save 500 bucks a month, earning, 7% annually, you'll have about 1.37 million after 40 years. That sounds impressive until you realize that with 3% inflation, that's worth 410,000 in today's purchasing power. You have spent 40 years to achieve what Warren makes in interest payments every few days. Here's what Warren will never acknowledge because it destroys his free market mythology. His entire empire is built on regulatory capture, owning businesses with government-enforced barriers that prevent competition. Insurance requires massive capital and regulatory approval. Railroads, they have physical monopolies protected by law. Utilities are regulated monopolies, but with guaranteed returns. And Warren doesn't compete in free markets. He owns pieces of government-sanctioned cartels. It's like Warren is playing Monopoly, but after buying all the properties before the game even started. And then lecturing other players about the importance of sound strategy while they try to build wealth landing on his hotels. Warren uses insurance premiums collected before claims are paid. You can create your own float using business credit lines. You could, get a business credit card with 2% cashback, use it for inventory that generates 15%, pay it off monthly, and pocket the arbitrage later. And house hacking, you could buy a duplex, live in one side, rent the other for enough to cover most of your mortgage payment. You could equipment finance, finance equipment that pays for itself through the income it generates. You can make strategic partnerships by using other people's customer bases, distribution networks, or expertise in exchange for revenue sharing. And Warren, he buys businesses that pay him today, not someday. 3 weeks ago, I analyzed two opportunities, a friend's tech startup with big growth potential and a small laundromat in my neighborhood that generates $4,200 in monthly profit. The startup pitch was exciting. Talks of, scaling, disrupting markets, potential millions. The laundromat was boring, just quarters, detergents, and consistent cash flow. Warren would pick the laundromat every single time, and so did I. Boring businesses with predictable cash flow, that beats exciting stories with hypothetical futures. Let others operate, you own. Warren doesn't manage his businesses. He structures deals where qualified people run them while he collects checks. You should probably think the same way. Buy rental properties in areas with established property management companies, invest in businesses with existing management teams who want to stay, create systems that run without your daily improvement, and focus on ownership structures, not operational involvement. Think like a monopolist, not a competitor. Only invest in opportunities where barriers to entry protect your returns. Real estate locations cannot be replicated. Buy in areas where with zoning restrictions or some sort of natural barriers. There's licensed businesses, legal barriers that limit competition, network effects, businesses that become more valuable as they grow, specialized skills, that's expertise that takes years to develop and that cannot be easily copied. Structure for upside and limit your downside. Like Warren's deal with Pete Liegl, structure agreements where you benefit from success but don't get destroyed by failure. Seller financing with performance-based payments. Joint venture with upside participations. Revenue sharing agreements instead of some sort of like fixed costs. Options and contracts that give you rights without obligations, stuff like that. Last month, I met Sarah, who is a 24-year-old who applied these exact principles to buy a small digital marketing agency, right? And here's how she structured the deal using Warren's playbook. So first was the float. She used a business credit line to cover the initial transition costs with the agency's existing cash flow covering payments within 30 days. Then there was cash flow focus. The agency already had 12 recurring clients generating 18K in monthly profit, which was no growth needed. And she let others operate. So the existing team, they stayed in place. Sarah just became the owner, collecting distributions. And she also did monopoly thinking, where the agency had exclusive contracts with three major local businesses and specialized expertise in a specific niche industry. And she looked for upside structure, so she negotiated seller financing, where the previous owner gets paid from future profits. Plus, she kept 70% of any revenue growth above the baseline. And 6 months later, Sarah, she's collecting 11K monthly in owner distributions while working her day job. Warren Buffett's principles scaled to someone with 15K in savings instead of 171 billion in insurance float. Now, look, I've just shown you something most people will never see. The difference between Warren Buffett's public image and his actual methods. He is not the patient, conservative investor teaching you to save pennies. He is a financial engineer that's operating one of the most sophisticated leverage empires in human history. While he's telling college students like you and I to live below their means, he himself has built his fortune living off of other people's money. While he's preaching long-term thinking, he's using other people's time and money to accelerate his returns. While he talks about simple investing, he's running the complex financial structures that most institutional investors don't even understand. The choice is yours. You guys could keep following the advice that Warren gives to the masses, like save money, buy index funds, think long term, live below your means. The path will make you comfortable, maybe even wealthy after 40 years of sacrifice. Or you can study what Warren actually does, which is use other people's money, buy cash flowing assets, create barriers to entry, structure deals where you can't lose. And this path can make you wealthy in years instead of decades. But it requires thinking like an owner instead of an employee. The real secret isn't Warren's stock pitches. It's his understanding that wealth is built with systems, with leverage, and other people's resources. Everyone else is trying to copy his portfolio of Robinhood. The smart money is copying his deal structures, capital allocation principles, and monopoly thinking. But here's what you need to understand about your generation. You have advantages Warren never had. You have access to information instantly, connect with opportunities globally, start business with minimal capital, and learn from mistakes faster than any generation in history. Warren built Berkshire over 60 years. You guys could build wealth using his principles in a fraction of that time if you guys think like an owner instead of a saver. The game is rigged, but once you know the rules, you can choose which side you want to be on and which side you want to play on. Warren showed you the rules. The question is, are you guys going to be keep playing by the advice he gives to others or start by the principles he uses himself? If you guys want me to break down exactly how to structure your first other people money deal using the same concepts, drop a comment below. And if you're serious about building wealth using institutional strategies at an individual scale, make sure you're subscribed because next week I'm going to be dissecting Blackstone's $900 billion real estate empire and showing you how they turned borrowed money into the largest alternative asset manager in the world. The difference between rich and wealthy isn't how much you save, it's how well you use other people's money to buy assets and that pay you forever, right? Like Warren, he figured out in 60 years, guys. Your generation, you guys could figure this out in 60 minutes, guys. Like, it's very simple. I'm gonna see you guys in the next one, and I'll be linking this document in the description. So if you guys want to check out the full document, you're welcome to do so. Bye, guys. See you in the next one.